Good evening, everyone. It's a very popular event, so we had a standby line. So I hope now everyone will find their place. My name is Anna Janewski. I'm the associate curator at the media performance department here at MoMA. Together with my colleagues, I had the great honor to co-organize the work Travail, Arbeid by Anne Teresa de Keersmaeker that I hope most of you have seen in the atrium here at MoMA, and if you're not, you will have the opportunity to see it by April 2nd. I'm also very honored and pleased to welcome Kathy Halbreich and Anne Teresa de Keersmaeker, who are extremely inspiring and someone I deeply admire. As you might know, Work Travail Arbeid is the exhibition that Anne Teresa de Keersmaeker organizes, starting from a seemingly simple question: how choreography can become an exhibition. And the starting point is already existing theater piece, Vortex Temporum, by the same name of the piece of the French composer Gérard Griset, and it's a music also that you can hear here in the atrium. And it's not the first time that Anne Teresa is here with us at MoMA with an already existing piece. It happened in 2011 in the atrium as well with the solo violin phase that she also, it's one of her first solos, one of her first pieces that she also created here in New York. And I mentioned that yesterday at the opening, how this image became really important for all of us, like a very referential image, and for many different reasons. But I would like also to quote Kathy Halbreich in the introduction to the MoMA Dance Series book, and you can read her introduction, the Ralph Lyman book, which is already out, edited by my colleague Thomas Lax. She's talking about this moment. She's talking about this moment of watching Anne Teresa de Keersmaeker violin phase from above, from the 4th and 5th floor, and at the moment when actually the performance is about to start, there is a woman who comes, and then she's in the museum, I suppose, on the 4th, 5th floor, looking at the collection, and she asks, what's going on? And Kathy has no time to answer. Anne Teresa started to dance, and there was a total silence. And somehow, this is the piece in the theater, and somehow there is something that happened in the atrium those few days. We officially opened today, but there were rehearsals from Monday, so I feel that the piece, the exhibition, has been living in the space for the 3 days at least. And usually I was talking with Elena Filipovic, who is the one who initiated somehow, who was the first organizer of the exhibition at WIELS in Belgium. And usually museums, unfortunately, but this is what they do, they measure certain success with numbers, the number of people who attended a certain show. Well, what is happening in the atrium, what happened those last 2 days and today, it's actually, there was something about people really being very attentive, really watching what is happening, being present. And that, I think, is some kind of a success that we have to keep in mind for the future also. As I said already, it's a piece that, it's an exhibition, it's an itinerant exhibition that started in WIELS. Rosa's, the dance company, Anne Teresa's dance company, and WIELS are very physically very close, so it was, I think, a kind of a also natural invitation to invite them and to think how choreography can be an exhibition. It traveled also to Tate Modern in London, in the Tuban Hall, also at Centre Pompidou in Paris. And I suppose that, and I saw some of the interactions, some of my colleagues, and everything in every place is very different. Anne Teresa likes to say there are very different mechanisms of the space. And yesterday, in the opening, and I'm sorry I'm referring to yesterday, we had a preview, which was a very special moment, I would say. Anne Teresa de Keersmaeker talked a lot about Trisha Brown and about her writing. And there is something about Anne Teresa's choreography that reminds me, that really refers to writing, like a very specific and unique choreographic language. And I would dare to say an extraordinary artist as well. And Kathy Halbreich is a very unique mentor, a very important mentor for many of us, great director and associate director here at MoMA, and also an art lover, and dance lover, and supporter. So without further ado, please welcome Anne Teresa de Keersmaeker and Kathy Halbreich.
Those words mean a lot to me, as does the presence of everybody here, but most especially Anne Teresa. And I have to say I'm a long time advocate of your work, having seen the Rosas in Boston in the 70s.
Oh my God. In 70s,
early
no.
80s then.
Early 80s. But
in high
80s.
heels.
Yeah, but not in the 70s.
Okay.
Yeah.
When was the first piece there? Do you remember?
In Boston?
Yeah.
But I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember.
I remember clearly being in the theater, but no idea when it was, other than in my early life. So I know many of these questions will not be unique to you tonight, so I'm very grateful that you're willing to help us understand the remarkable work you've made. Maybe it makes sense to start at the beginning. How do you start making a dance, and what do you know at the beginning of the process?
Well, usually, in most of the cases, not always, but in most of the cases, music is very often the starting point. Not always, but in the past 35 years, I've made a lot of different pieces where music was a starting point and where I've been mainly interested in developing very different strategies in the relationship between dance and music. From the two extremely opposites of, on the one hand, the John Cage, Merce Cunningham model, where music and dance are very independent from each other, to the other opposites, which I call sort of jokingly, do you say that? The Mickey Mouse relationship. Mickey Mouse goes down the stairs and the music does pam 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 pam. Mickey Mouse goes up the stairs, the music goes pam 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 pam. Which is sort of considered as bad relationship between music and dance. I've developed a lot of different ways of connecting music and dance. In the late years, mainly through my collaboration with Anne-Veronica Janssens in Michel François, visual arts have been a starting point of questioning what it means to perform in a black box. What is the material you use to structure time and space? Because basically, that is what you learn at school. What is a possible definition of choreography? It could be organizing movements in space and in time with a certain amount of energy. I tend to add to that on a vertical axis and on a horizontal axis. So yes, I have worked with music from a whole lot of different periods. Lately also I got in a very concrete way also interested in text and taking language as a starting point to not only generate vocabulary but also to phrase and structure movement material. So it has been an ongoing passion and search over the last 30 years. And then in the case I start with music, to answer your question, then I put up parallel tracks in the beginning. One of the tracks will be is analyzing the music. If I judge that an analysis is useful, because sometimes you want to know, sometimes you don't want to know, and you prefer to have an immediate intuitive response. Sometimes you want to have an analytical response. Generally, if I analyze music, it's because it not only to understand, but generally it's also good to steal ideas, you know, and to understand how composers generate their material and what are the devices, what are the procedures they use to organize the sound in time and in space. But anyway, if you make choreography to music, your time frame is mainly given by the music, you know. Then I work a lot in silence, and maybe not working on desire, but how shall I say? The movements that emerge. It's always, I don't know how I should define it. A lot of this is the place and the time where I am now, that's the way I move. And the simple thing of, I like these movements. I like to be in the studio and do those movements, has been always like this sort of a basic motor of. So you start to generate and to work on vocabulary in the way that is what you like.
Do you ever exhaust your love of a movement?
No. The only thing what you can say is, of course, with time passing by, your body is your first instrument, and if there is a place where the perception of time is the most perceived, it's in your body. You know, not in a negative way, but in a changing way. The other aspect is also, compared to, I think, to visual arts, the practice of dance is a very social, intensive practice. It's always the work of a community, you know. I need to work alone, and in those 30 years I have, with several periods, worked on smaller pieces where I'm more alone, and then I work with smaller or larger group of dancers, and the pieces were made with specific dancers, the dancers who are close to you, men and women, with whom you share a vocabulary, a search, people who love dance and who take dance seriously, and who are willing to spend a lot of time in the studio and trying out those different mechanics of movement. So if Rosas Danst Rosas is what it is, it's not only because I had an idea and I had a clear design of a musical choreographic dramaturgy, but it was also because it was Fumio and Michelin and Adriana who were there, and their bodies are somehow present. It's a very socially intense and collective experience where these days choreographers don't work anymore about being directive in a sense. Everybody does this, everybody to the left, to the right, and the front and the back, but you basically come with questions and you share, and then they give their print.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. So, I mean, you're an extremely, at least from the outside, it looks to be demanding choreographer. There's a kind of precision and a kind of endurance that are required. So I wanted to ask you how much liberty there is, or individuality there is permitted for your dancers.
In which part of the process?
Well,
During the performance?
So let's actually start when I gather a lot of it is improvised initially, or not?
In the show?
No, not in the show, in the process of making a work.
Well, improvisation is a tool to create material. Originally, I didn't use that, but with the years that improvisation became as a tool to search and to deduct, you say that? Material, yeah. what I wanted to say, the dancers I created Vortex Temporum with, those 7 dancers I worked with, they put their individual input, really printed, shaped, sculpted the final choreography in a very directive way. And then once the writing is done, it can be transmitted to new generations of dancers. But the collective aspect of creating together is really, I think, essential to choreography. And of course, to your question of improvisation, is the whole operation that becomes now here with Vortex Temporum, that was put from the black box to the white cube, where the spatial and time parameters are completely different. Yes, it is extremely precisely written. There is a geometrical pattern that organizes the space, but since the presence of the audience changes and is completely liquid, it is their part of their work to, in the moment itself, to adapt that, and from taking from that rigorous patterns to adjust and adjust those patterns and that writing instantly. So yes, that is, you have a combination of something which is extremely structured and written, and that in the moment itself, it's constantly adapted and changes.
And how does duration change the movement, and how do you account for that?
Well, I think there are different levels of duration. You know that in this case, the original piece was the condensed time and space, but the time was like 1 hour with a beginning and an ending. Yeah.
That's for the stage, you mean?
Yeah, for the stage, yes. Here, that there was this operation where in a cyclical way, we expanded it to a longer cycle of 9 hours, which shifts over the hours of the museum. So in a repetitive way, the same pattern, time pattern is repeated. As you see, it is physically extremely intense, and intensity and duration changes the body. When I haven't danced and I give you this, I do you this gesture that close to you, is something totally different when I've been running.
Right.
And I'm so that my body has been transformed by the extremely intense labor, by the work, because that's what it is. I mean, I think...
And that's part of the meaning of this, isn't it?
To a certain extent, yeah. The opening hours of the museum are basically the rehearsal hours of, we work in Brussels, you know, we have a 9 to 5 job. And it is very horizontal work, patiently really constructing step by step. Here you have this extremely, nearly, I would say, dare to say, luxury of audience seeing this intensity that normally is condensed in 1 hour. You see it here stretched over and repeated.
So my friend Ralph Lemon, who has also performed in this atrium, after he did it the first time, said he had never felt the breath of his audience before, and that was somehow apocalyptic. How have how have your dancers reacted to being off the stage and sharing the same space with the audience?
Well, it has been definitely a very new experience. You know, the first experience I did with bringing choreography, which was originally staged for the black box, was with Phase, when actually here with what you saw before.
Right.
Yes, and then it was at the opening of the tanks. But still, there the space stayed limited,
Right.
and the time stayed limited. Here, the main thing is when you're in a black box, people are dark. It's a dark space where you feel like an energetic field.
Mm-hmm.
But since when we go in the museum during the opening hour, the light is different. It's daylight. Your physical interaction with the public is completely different. You see how you not only you see the audience, but you also see how they watch you.
Mm-hmm.
You see how people make choices about where they place themselves, how long they stay, if they're bored or not. So that is, generally after the experience in WIELS and in Tate, when we go back to the black box, we miss it.
Uh-huh.
We miss it. It's like...
It's quite direct.
Yeah, it's quite direct. I mean, also on Monday, when we did the rehearsals, for reasons of concentration, we first blocked with a rope, and it felt dumb.
Mm-hmm.
It felt dumb. We felt like we were in a zoo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we felt like sort of. We felt we were like in a zoo, because it was so very soon. I asked Anna and the people, can we take it away, which we had to organize because of insurance and all that.
But I did notice you were also walking through the space, watching dancers, not from the periphery, but like crossing and...
Yeah, but I think that was very specific. You know, when Elena Filipovic and Dirk Snauwaert of the WIELS Contemporary Art Center came to see me and did a proposition of, would you be interested in creating an exhibition as a performance, or a performance as an exhibition? Would you be willing to think about it? I was at that point working on the black box version of Vortex Temporum. And it immediately had this thing, came to what I was practicing in the studio. Because this piece, inspired by the music, which is Vortex Temporum, the spiral of times, and because I've been since years been interested not only by circle but also by spiralic movement, as a opening and one of the most unifying opening and closing form. I was, when I was in the studio, I was constantly like traveling around, you know. This practicing in circles, like you see that what I do in the workshop now, actually came up from a practice we did with, a couple of years ago, I made this piece called Cesena, which was with live music with singers. And the dancers were singing and the singers were dancing. And we had to practice quite complicated music. And the person who guided that, Bjorn Schmelzer, when we practiced, everybody would go and stand in circle. You know, in dance, a lot of the way we learn the language is by this frontality. The most extreme is, of course, with ballet. You know, is that you're in front of the mirror. And very often, this mistraining that a lot of ballet dancers where you actually follow your own form, you know. In contemporary dance, of course, it's a practice which has been abolished for a long time. But then still, you work on the kind of frontality. With singing, you use naturally this circular form, which is actually geometrically the most democratic form. Everybody has the same relationship to the center, the same distance, and you share the same information. And it's a very nice form to have the unifying element energy. So how did I come to there?
Let me jump ahead 1 second, because I'm very interested in this idea of democracy, and you speak about that often. And
yeah, I know.
Go.
I came because of
frontality.
No, when Elena asked me to do that, I was working on it, and I was already like traveling around in the studio, and then I thought, oh well, in the museum, it would be good to break up this frontality, and this material is really made for that. The very form of a vortex has no frontality, yeah. And then the fact that Griset's music is based on this notion of condensing and expanding of time, which actually was a key issue in how
you can construct it.
Constructed for the expanded to the museum time, you know, and working this notion of duration. Yeah.
Okay, so duration and democracy is what I want to pursue for a second. And André Lepecki is here, and so I'm a little embarrassed, but I'm going to quote something he wrote for your catalog for WIELS, which was, he said, "Extension in this sense is crucial, since it reveals an expenditure and a devotion that are highly crucial for the ethics of the particular performance, the ethics of working as a dimension of care, the dancer of care.
Care.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the dancer's task." So let's say if, and you don't have to follow this question, but this question of ethics is really what I want to get at. And if ethics is a set of moral judgments that guide our behavior, is there such a thing as an unethical dance? Or what are the rights and wrongs in very loose manner that you're dealing with?
What I can say, there is something, I think, extremely, necessarily by its very nation in the DNA of performing, which is not narcissistic or exhibitionistic, but which is generous. There is a generosity and a possible physical empathy, you know. Yes, there is an extremely une dépense d'énergie, and it creates a kind of a kind of luxury, you know, that people are, you know, in visual arts the work is very often done before, you know, and then there is an object made. Dancers are not objects. This making this work possible, it has to be reenacted. It has to be done over and over again, and it's done with the body, which is the most contemporary object that exists.
Because it's in real time?
It's in real time, and it's what is more from now and here than my body.
Your being in your body. Yeah.
Yes, and the intensity that is there embodied in the moment and that you share with the spectators is high, and I think that there is something. It's a kind of possible dangerous but beautiful place to be. You know, it's.
What's the dangerous part?
Well, especially when you have a very, I'm very much interested in readability, you know, and I like very structured, rigorous, articulated writing. And you have a very articulated score that, as a solo performer or with a group of people, you embody in the moment itself. And that rigor of that structure is constantly challenged when you're in a live performance. So you constantly have to make choices. Yeah. I think in all the dances I've made, I think Piano Face, the first dance, the opening dance of Fasen is the most challenging in that, you know, because it's nearly like a machine that you put. And you're sort of, you have to embody that machine, you have to embody that structure. And it's so demanding, and yet there is such, for me, there is such an enormous space of freedom that opens. Yeah, I don't know which, I think which jazz composer said, there is no freedom in freedom, there is only freedom in structure. And that is something that how shall I, on a daily way you're busy with that. And yes, it is physically intense. So it's not easy go, it's hard labor, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I think just dancers, they work hard. Well, compared to other musicians also, well, I'm not saying that visual artists don't work hard, but there is something, it's really, you know, I think a lot of people underestimate it.
Well, I think there's nowhere to hide if you're a dancer.
It's nowhere to hide, and your body is strong and it's fragile. You know?
This to me is what was so clear about watching this piece today. And yes, at first, I was watching it with two visitors, and one woman, I said to Anne Teresa, was quite grumpy and immediately decided, really within seconds, that she didn't like it. But her friend was a little bit more open, and we were standing from above, and so she saw the pattern, and she thought, well, maybe this is a mandala. And I encouraged her to pursue that interest of hers. And then the other woman said, well, it looks so mechanical. And I said, well, be with it for a while, because maybe you'll actually see what I see, which is that grows increasingly fragile. And it is that play, you know, between, there's a certain exquisite precision that gives way to a kind of exquisite fragility, which is where the empathy, I think, can come from, is when you see this body, you know, really doing something for you that's quite extraordinary.
Yes. And you can see it from very close. And there is, I think there is an interesting mixture between daily movement, which is linked, a lot of the material, the movement material is based on walking and running, which is pedestrian movement, which is the movement that belongs to also everybody who's watching. And yet there is a different kind of virtuosity also in the precision of this walking, but also in the other movement vocabulary that is used. And yeah, people are not used to see that. Yeah, I think, of course, like a lot of it was for me a challenge to bring highly precise and not only daily movement into the museum, to have a certain notion of not virtuosity but high-skilled dancing into the museum. Yeah. Yeah.
And also, I mean, whatever we might like,
it's. I think, yeah, of course. I mean,
But it's
I
also
think
you're
Trisha Brown
requiring
from-
patience, you know, which honestly, short of us curatorial types standing in galleries and engaging people, people go through galleries very quickly.
Of course, yes.
It's painfully true. But
There isn't a standard time, no? What is 2 minutes?
Something
in
like
how
that.
much in front of a painting?
2 minutes would probably be a long time. You know,
More in seconds. Oh, how much?
a minute.
Between 30 seconds and a minute.
There is this film of in Godard, no, is about visiting the Louvre in 5 minutes, sort of running through the Louvre.
And I mean, maybe one could say the same thing. You can't really see a painting in a minute, but you really can't see what you're doing in a minute.
No. I think it's the thing what Anna said about Elena said about it's not only to measure the amount of visitors, but the amount of hours people spent in the exhibition. You know, that was something very I really loved in all the experiences, both in Paris as in Brussels. And some people would come and spend hours and be sitting there because they like this place. It's a good place to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a beautiful place to be, and they, that is definitely so crucially different with the performance, you know, where you can come too late and where you.
Well, is there a beginning and end to the work that you're showing every day?
Well, there is a cyclical structure, you know, it changes every hour. And we constructed the cycle over 9 hours. So things repeat themselves, but in constantly changing formations.
And what role does drawing play? Does it come in early, and then it's so much a part of this work, and it's there for us?
You mean the action of drawing, or in the work process?
Both. When do you make something like this?
Quite early. Very often, nearly always. If there is a music score, the music gives my time frame. And then sometimes I visualize that really literally on the line. And I will make a drawing of what the time structure is on that line. You know, first movement, really objectively, and this is 10 minutes, this is 12 minutes. And then I will make a geometrical pattern and decide I'm going to work on a square, I'm going to work on a circle, and then I put the timeline and the space line under each other. And I make drawings in that span of time. I want to work on that spatial direction. And that was there from the beginning with Violin Face, which I made when I was here in New York, and I was practicing to the music, finding vocabulary, and then I had this need of I have to have somewhere to go, or I need tools to make decisions, and to make choices, you know, to organize my space, and that's how it came from. That's how I started to. I sort of. I need to have a visual image in my head, so that whatever ideas come up, that I can place them, that I can visualize them.
When you were here, I mean, I'm also in another moment of my life here working on a Bruce Naumann exhibition. And I'm very aware that in the late 60s, early 70s, that people like Bruce would make work that was just as long as the videotape. Was that influential, that kind of thinking? I mean,
As the videotape?
yeah, I'm going to perform, he would say, you know, this very simple action.
As long as the videotape.
Yeah.
This I have to think a moment, because
I mean, Bruce
of
was
course,
very interested in
with technology changing, this notion of duration changed completely, no?
Absolutely.
So, did I ever had something like this? I don't think so. I know that one thing is, for example, the whole structure of Rosas Danstrosas was made on the idea of the passing of a day, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We would divide it in morning, midday, afternoon, evening, you know, and structure it that way. I've always been obsessed by spirals, and not only as a geometrical spatial form, but also as a time structure. You know, I will say, okay, first part is going to be 21 minutes, then it's going to be 13 minutes, it will be 8 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. And then, so you will have an acceleration.
Mm-hmm. And so it makes a spiral in you, I mean...
Yeah, but then I really objectively say I calculate.
Mm-hmm.
I very often have my assistant and calculate, okay, tell me that's the time of the music, now calculate me where is the golden section.
Mm-hmm.
And
and
then I'm fascinated by proportions. So basically I think that's one of the beautiful things I like about dance, is that you can embody the most abstract ideas. And I will then, I set up very strict rules, and then I start to negotiate with those rules where I deviate from it. Yeah, so then I sort of negotiate with myself.
And that's the freedom, right? That's the aspect.
That's the freedom. That's sort of that's sort of the beautiful balance between creating things and letting things happen, of making things happen and letting things come to you, and accepting. And
you're also interested, I think, in the magic square.
yes.
Does so these are different kinds of rules, right? The magic square is a rule out of reason, in a way.
Yes, yes. Oh, well, that's a whole chapter on itself. It's basically a mathematical formula where whatever direction you add it to, you have the same amount. But I used it to organize the space, but it's also linked to different energetical stages.
Right.
I combined it to different three-dimensional forms like the dodecahedron, and so yeah.
What do you mean when you say energetic stages?
Well, you know, I have been more than 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I got interested in Eastern thinking about energy, and basically through Taoism in yin-yang thinking, and basically the idea what you have is like in the body, what there is oneness, two-ness, three-ness, you know, opposition, one, unity, opposition. And then you have three, and after three you have infinity. And basically what you have, just like your heart, like your breathing, you have opening and closing spirals, movements. That's basically just like the cycles of a day, the sun comes up, the sun goes down, like this cyclical thinking. Cyclical thinking, it's always the same in a different shape, you know, circular forms, and especially opening and closing spirals is in whether it's the movement in the oceans, whether it's the movements in the cosmos. What is the spirals on the top of your fingers, the spirals on the top of your head. Spirals are everywhere. And
it sort of reminds me of something that...
And that happened, and actually those different stages of, in Eastern philosophy, these movements of opening and closing, which they call the yin-yang thinking, have a lot of more detailed information, is what they call 5 transformations, and that is according to what they call metal energy, fire energy, wind energy, and so on. And that has been, it has been, for me, it's a second nature now. I work with that.
But you studied it seriously, right?
Yeah, well, I didn't close myself up for a year to study that.
You did not?
I didn't, no, it was very much linked to cooking.
Huh. Like microbiotic, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
But basically cooking is like, a little bit like choreography. It's, you're organizing things in time and space with the energies with water and fire. So it's it's choreographing and alchemy. That's basically what it is. It's like alchemy.
Well, that's what I was hoping you might get to from the Magic Square. I didn't realize we would get to a shared love of cooking.
Oh, yeah.
I do think it's a totally sensory experience, cooking. But so let me ask you something that your Gérard Griset, the composer, said when he was 22 years old. He said that music was a synthesis of the cerebral and emotional, which is somewhat what we've been talking about. And his work was described as the internal microscopic structure of sound as a model for the macroscopic ensemble of harmonies. So I was wondering, what is the microscopic structure of dance? Is it time? Is it space? Is it bodies? Is that possible to answer?
That's difficult. I mean, I think in dance, time and space through the body really grip into each other. Yeah. Your perception of time is perceived by your perception of space. This division between body and mind, I think we were a long time way beyond that. It's unexisting. So what was the question exactly? What is the microscopic
structure of dance? If the structure of, if Griset's the internal microscopic structure of sound is a model for macroscopic ensemble of harmonies.
Well, yeah. I mean, this music is very specific. Yeah, it's a music which is very difficult to categorize. But one of the basic elements of spectralist music is that those people were in the 60s and 70s very much influenced by the scientific research of what the very nature of sound is. You know, and they did a kind of reverse operation from the scientific analysis of what sound was. They brought it from electronic music. They brought it back to acoustic music, and they, in a scientific way, they analyzed what is a sound, how is it constructed, what is the vibrational structure from
like
that.
the waves, actually.
Yes, and how can we rewrite that and use the instrument in its extremely concrete materiality. So that was one of the basic elements that he used to create spectralist music. Even though one can say, I mean, this music, as I say, it's difficult to categorize. It has a lot of different aspects. It's extremely structural music, but in the same way, it refers to, through its repetition, for example, to minimal music. It has something ritual. It has concrete links to musique concrète, like people like Lacherman, you know, when you hear the strings going on, when they push the bow on the strings, it's like, it's the action, and it's the gesture, the physical gesture that is embodied in the sound. So it's a language on its own in which Griset, I think, managed, specifically in this piece, to master all those elements in a very personal way that that I think that gives it status that I considered it as one of the masterpieces of contemporary dance after World War.
Music.
Yeah, music-wise, yes.
Did you have to redefine dance for yourself in the way that he might have redefined music, do you think?
No, I think that would be exaggerated to say. What I can say is that in Vortex Temporum, already in the black box version, there are a lot of thoughts and questions I asked myself in the last decade that came together in this work. My thinking about geometry, redefining where is movement generated in the body, the working with spirals, the relationship between dance and music. So when Elena asked me to do this work, you know, and not to go into retrospective, you know, and to show all different parts, I had the feeling that a lot of tools I developed over the past 30 years came together in here. And so in that sense, it was not only work, labor, but it was also, okay, this is voorlopig, temporary breaking point where a lot of the questions I asked myself in the work come together. So it's really the work itself. One of the aspects that you just mentioned about did I have to redefine? No. No, I didn't, and I think there is still that aspects, for example, how he works with micro intervals and things like that. This is something what I think where there's still work to be done. You know, when you take music as a starting point, and when you take, between brackets, difficult music as a starting point, you have to also focus. You can't focus all problems in the same time. You know, sometimes I simplify certain aspects of music so that que ça peut être abordable. I don't even know how you say that. Yeah, that people, to reach to people.
It's the readability question.
Readability.
Yeah.
I remember when I made, the fourth piece I made was to the fourth string for quartet of Bela Bartok. You know, Bela Bartok wrote 6 string quartets. And the fourth string quartet, which he wrote at the end of his life, are the most dissonant and I think the most beautiful but quite complicated. And I remember, is something wrong? No. I remember when I brought that music into the studio, and I thought it was extremely danceable music, and I proposed this to the dancers, and I saw their face. when I said, well, we're going to make a choreography to this music. And it was like, because they found it was difficult music. So one of the challenges is when you take this kind of difficult music and to make that abordable, you have to find tools.
Mm-hmm.
So what I very often do is then, well, not very often, in certain cases, I take like a red pen and I will sort of underline what I like. And then in the case of Bartók, I took a very questionable option. It's, for example, to work with unisono on a string quartet writing, where counterpoint is maybe the very definition of that. But you make a choice. And to a certain extent, I also do that here with Vortex Temporum.
Mm-hmm. I'm being signaled. I have many more things to ask you, which we'll just have to do next time. But before we turn to our friends in the audience, but what removal reminds me of is another Eastern art form, which is ikebana, which is it's all about removing until something extremely artificial ends up looking natural.
Yes, yes, yes.
So we have microphones that will come to you. Please don't speak before you get the microphone, because we are streaming this and our online friends won't hear you. So there's a question right here. Thank you.
Thanks. I think the word you wanted was amenable. I was interested in the question about ethics, and you began by dismissing, well, there's narcissistic and exhibitionism, but then you probed further and you were saying, well, dance can be generous. So is ungenerous dance unethical?
Ungenerous dance, yeah, well.
What is that?
What would be ungenerous dance?
Yeah.
Ungenerous dance would be...
I think you said generous dance creates this extra energy.
I'm trying to think loud with you together.
Thank
You know, what would be the thin line you draw between showing yourself out of a narcissistic way or wanting to create how shall I say that? To share in a generous way.
So is that dialogue, communication?
Yes, yes, yes. It is, of course, a question, you know. Normally, the normal ways of sharing dance is that we all dance together. No? That is, I dance and let's all dance together. And I think it's crucially different. I mean, dance is at the advantage to that it's possible. We can't all draw together, but the very practice of dancing allows such a different degrees of involvement and of, you know, you can have high technical dance, but if you want, we all can get up and everybody can dance. No?
Well, some of us.
No, to a certain extent, you know.
So performance is good when it's like dancing together?
When it is?
Like dancing together?
No.
I find a little bit dangerous space what you're saying about making this judgmental thing. Performance is good when it's like dancing together.
Sorry, the question
Yeah,
was
no,
about
I
ethics,
mean-
so I was trying to, I hadn't thought about the question before and I was interested.
Okay, we can circle
Well,
back
yeah,
to
let
that
me-
at some point.
Yeah.
You know, give us a little time to, it's a hard,
Yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting to me, but it's hard to wrap your mind around. But sometimes I think we shouldn't confuse whether an artist is generous with whether the work is generous. And I think that is a distinction we can make that might be useful. But I'm just going to go to the woman in pink. Did you still have a question?
I'm not sure I will express well what I want to say, but I saw the performance last night. And for me, it's a perfect example of strength of the work, either visual or in dance, that I saw that was with less, but it was so strong, with so minimal. I mean, you could see they were so disciplined, so controlled, and yet it looked like it was at times easy, I guess.
What happened? It looks like you folks in the back, either I can't see you or you don't have any questions, but please raise your hand.
So my question is about the way that you bring your ideas before you show up to the space, and then how you work with the different performers that you choreograph. So to what degree do you come in with an idea, and how do you balance that idea with the body of whoever it is that you're working with?
Well, it's always theory and practice, you know. I think you don't want to spend hours and hours around the table, and you don't want to spend hours and hours on the dance floor. I think it's a very delicate balance in dance. You know, in Eastern philosophy, they say that dancing and deep thinking don't go together.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because your body needs is appealing on other mechanisms. Yet I find that the combination is really crucial. You know, so certain things, certain thoughts, certain articulations emerge through the physical practice, and a certain physicality emerges through the reflective practice. So that has been on many different levels something that you constantly have to Is it a kind of Marxistic theory that you say no practice without theory and no theory
You
without
have to
practice?
put it on your jacket.
Yeah.
I'm getting a signal we
Yeah.
can't be heard.
Yeah, but I really do so, and that is also how it happens in the studio. You know, we have the dance floor and we spend a lot of time by moving, and we spend time around the table, and by thinking and articulating what are the thoughts that carry the work, and what is the physical practice that carry the thoughts. It's constantly
Nick, back there, I see a hand, I know. So.
But it is a kind of discipline that you have to impose yourself, because it's not easy, and it mainly what it is, it's very time consuming. It's very time consuming because it takes time to be in that practice, and it takes time to develop those thoughts.
But you also often work with the same dancers for years,
Yeah,
so
that's
it
true.
becomes, the language becomes almost muscular, right?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But it is, it's slow working processes, you know. So that's, it's generally, that's one of those things, what in the mechanics of how the market works now, which is, you know, the work takes time, and time is money. It's as simple as that. And
Nick?
that is difficult to be able to create those structures where we can take the time to where we can afford that time to do that work.
Is it harder than it's ever been or not?
Yes, it is. But I think it's in all levels of the performing arts don't escape from that economic logic. You know, the pressure is very high in that sense.
To fill the seats?
Well, to fill the seats and to have that time and the space to practice that. It's like.
Go ahead, Nick.
I want to thank you for giving us this luxury of being in the dance and moving around it and being able to revisit it. And I'm almost afraid to ask this question, but I was really struck by what you said about how the dances are really made with your dancers and for specific dancers who make their imprint on the work. And so I am curious about how or whether you think about the future of these dances and how they can...
In which way?
You know, how they can be passed on, you know, whether it is through the dancers or certain notations or recordings.
Well, yeah, but it's a crucial question with dance and contemporary dance, especially with dance which has made in the whole 20th century, is there an écriture, a writing that makes that it can be given over to new generations of dancers? You know what happened with the death of Pina Bausch, with the death of Trisha Brown, death of Merce Cunningham. What is happening with his, how do you call it, legacy? Yeah. Can we bring it over to new generations, to new audiences? Do we have to? Do we have to? Well, it's a question, yeah. Is it the DNA, is it the very nature of this art form that it has to disappear? Should it be given over to new generations of dancers? Or should it be only taped? You have, you know, in the same way we have the biggest library of dance ever through YouTube. You know, you have access to it, and still the craftsmanship, the very nature of that material is best given over in a very old-fashioned way. You know, I teach you how this movement was made. As long as the dancers or the choreographers who made the work are still alive, the work can be given over. You know, the work that Diane Madam and Carolyn Lucas are doing now with Trisha's work.
Or Swinton.
Merce Cunningham developed a different way. They created this.
But there's also Robert Swinton, who danced with him and now teaches his dance.
But it's an ongoing question in the whole dance community, and especially the history of the 20th century modern dance. It's
quite a philosophical question, isn't it?
Yes, because it's I mean, that our tool is our bodies, and it's very anchored in our humanity, but it's also, we're made from dust and we will return to dust. And yeah, that's what it is. It raises the question of memory.
Which is, you said time was this tipping point between memory and anticipation, right? That must be some reason why you like to work with it so much.
Yes. It's a space between the past and the future. That's when we hear, and I don't know, I must say, it's also the question of archives, you know. We were speaking yesterday about it. I heard that MoMA bought
Simone Forte's
props work. Yeah.
With the understanding that we are responsible for organizing a way to teach that going forward.
Yes.
So it's not just the things, it's the legacy through teaching. And that was my question to my dear colleagues. Are you prepared to take on this forever responsibility?
Yeah.
It's a different kind of care, but it's conservation, I think.
Yes.
Speaking of which, Stuart.
Teresa and Kathy, thanks for this very generous conversation. I think my question follows on from Nick's, and it's more specifically about the image as a trace. And you spoke so beautifully last night about Trisha Brown and her legacy, and I think Trisha had such a sophisticated understanding of her work through images, both through the drawings, through mechanical photography, and sort of cinematic logic. And I think you share some of that, but it has shifted. And I'm particularly curious about this piece in this space and the sculptural quality of it, standing there, being hyper-aware of the geometries involved, not least because it's drawn specifically on the floor, but watching those geometries transform into limbs literally falling or flying in front of your face, very close to you. And also being aware of the number of iPhones photographing this event, you know, and so it's no longer
iPhones.
It's no longer Bruce Naumann, you know, correlating his work to one videotape. You're having to accommodate, you know, all these different kinds of gazes and mechanical gazes, and the work is producing thousands of images potentially a minute in that space. And so there are many legacies for the work and many archives now and many different publics. And so I think we have to rethink the legacies for dance given those new technologies. And as you innovate new ways of thinking about how your work responds to a space, transforms that space, how can we rethink how images might then transform that experience and carry it forward into the future?
So what is the question exactly? In which degree that the fact that images are taken from it?
Even just thinking, I mean, in terms of your comments about Trisha Brown last night and knowing that she has just passed away, and thankfully we do have a very sophisticated archive that we can rely on to have some understanding of that work. What kind of images do you feel will serve this particular project going forward? I mean, one is floating above your head as I speak, and it's a very beautiful diagram. But how do you think through? I'm thinking also about Charles Atlas, who's been very involved in our forthcoming Robert Rauschenberg show, someone else who's thought a lot about documenting dance. But given the new tools that are available to us, you know, how might we rethink this a bit?
Well, yeah, but the only thing is with all those images, they have a very high degree of fixity, you know, and I think the very nature of dance is there is no fixity. Yeah, so there are many different ways that you can approach all those different you can approach all those different aspects of what the very nature of dance is. But the totality of that experience is, yeah, I'm really wondering whether it's a contradictio in terminis. Yeah.
So I think we're almost done, but I want to ask you one more question before I release you from this. You've had a long day. Is there anything to take back to the stage from the exhibition?
Yeah, well, that's a really real question that I said before that when we go back to the black box theater in this experience we have had now with those 4 different places, we miss the museum space. Yeah, we feel sort of. So I've been wondering, yeah, how it can possibly change, how it possibly can change.
But it's the relationship with the audience, really. Yeah,
Yeah, that it really changes. It's really different. It's also the relationship to architecture. I find this is really crucial. This has been so really interesting for me, from those 4 different spaces, from in WIELS, which were 2 spaces. It's not a really wide cube. It's an all-industrial space where, when we came to meet Veronica Janssens, really immediately proposed to take off all the,
lighting fixtures.
the things that were hiding the sunlight.
Oh, yeah, over the windows, right? To remove them.
Yeah, so that the sun could come in,
Yeah.
and the sun shaped the time because of the sun changing around the space. Not only it was incredibly beautiful because it transformed the movement, it transformed the colors, and like in a very ancient way, you could perceive the time. You would say, okay, the sun is falling in from there, so we're in the afternoon. And it changed completely the energetic space. I mean, it looks ridiculous, but we knew, okay, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, people come in, people are on a different energetic stage than when they come in at 11 o'clock in the morning.
I know that from my own body.
Yeah, well, it's true, yeah. Then in Pompidou, the space was larger. We had to stretch it. In Turbine Hall, we had 3 vortexes. Yeah. Here you had the whole audience flow, which was with this other space. So when we were working with Anne Veronica and the dancers on Monday, I had a little bit hard time to find, okay, now this pattern which is going to guide us, we have to put it in a different way. How do we deal with this frontality? And also, how do we transform what do we do with the sound? Because here the space is also very much perceived by the sound, and the amount, WIELS was a very closed space, you know. The decision, you had to nearly literally open a door and go in. Where here you have constantly this transitory flow, and you have a lot of other
ambient noise.
Yeah, so
excuse me. Sorry.
So that was has been very interesting in rethinking that, and to rethink that, and of course I have a lot of experience with it, like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, I don't know, performances. And you're used as a dancer to travel from theater to theater. But the basic situation is always this frontality. And you have small spaces, big spaces, and so. And it really has invited me to think how we have to continue and expand this experience. And I'm not totally clear yet about what a possible next step could be. I know that light is very important, you know. One of the things why when Anne Veronica and I started to work together is when I discovered her work, and especially her work she did with light, and that I was extremely frustrated working for months into the studio with daylight and then going into this black box of the theater, and that my perception of what I saw, of the images, when you work with dance, you're working with sound and you work with energy, but the whole visual aspect is so crucial. And yeah, I don't know yet. It's for me too soon to speak where this will bring me in the coming
I guess
years.
I just hope I'm there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.